I've been lurking on this sub for a long time, reading other people's confessions, half convincing myself that my own stories weren't bad enough to belong here. But the older I get, the heavier some of this stuff feels, and I guess I'm finally ready to put one of these memories somewhere outside my head. This happened about 12 years ago, back when I was broke, angry at the world, and convinced I was smarter than everyone else. I wasn't some criminal mastermind. I was just a guy with a passport, a dented sedan, and a friend who knew a guy who knew a guy. The crime itself sounds almost boring when you say it out loud, smuggling prohibited goods across a border. But boring crimes can still ruin lives. At the time, I was living paycheck to paycheck, working warehouse shifts and burning through money on cheap beer and bad decisions. I had student loans, a girlfriend who was slowly realizing I was going nowhere, and a constant, gnawing feeling that I was being left behind. Everyone else seemed to be moving forward. I was stuck. Then came Mark. Mark was the kind of person who always had a side hustle. Some of them were legit. Most of them were fuzzy. He showed up one night at my apartment with a six-pack and that look people get when they're about to say something that will definitely complicate your life. He told me he had a way to make a few $1,000s in a single weekend. No skills required. Just a car and nerves. I laughed at first. I assumed drugs? I said I wasn't interested. I'd seen enough mugshots in my hometown to know how those stories end. Mark shook his head and said, "Not drugs. Worse paperwork, though." That was his first red flag sentence. What he meant was restricted electronics and specialized components, stuff that was heavily taxed, tightly controlled, and technically illegal to transport without permits. Not flashy. Not cinematic. But profitable. The pitch was simple: drive across the border with a normal load, come back with a slightly modified load, and drop it at a warehouse 2 towns over. No names. No receipts. Cash payment. I remember asking, "What happens if I get caught?" Mark didn't hesitate. "You won't." That should have been my second red flag. My motive wasn't noble. I didn't need money for medicine or family emergencies. I wanted to pay off some debt, buy a better car, and feel like I'd beaten the system for once. I was tired of feeling small. I told myself it was a victimless crime. Big companies lose a few dollars. Governments lose tax money. No one gets hurt. That lie slid into place way too easily. Within a week, I'd agreed. I didn't feel like a criminal yet. I felt like someone about to pull off a clever trick. Looking back, that's the part that scares me the most. Once I said yes, everything moved faster than I expected. Mark suddenly became very organized, which, in hindsight, should have terrified me. He stopped joking. Stopped improvising. Every sentence became short and specific. First, he told me to clean my car. Not throw out trash. Clean. He meant detail-level clean. Vacuumed carpets. Wiped door seams. Cleared trunk liner. No loose papers. No receipts. No personal junk. "Your car should look boring," he said. "Boring people don't get searched." That sentence stuck with me. We met at a self-serve car wash at midnight. Cold water, humming fluorescent lights, nobody else around. I scrubbed like my life depended on it. Maybe it already did. Then came the cover story. I was supposedly visiting my aunt for a long weekend. Mark made me rehearse it. Where she lived. What she did for work. How old her dog was. What her house looked like. I didn't even have an aunt in that city. He also told me to dress down. No flashy clothes. No new shoes. Nothing that screamed, "I have disposable income." Just another tired guy driving too far for family obligations. We talked routes, border crossings, time windows. He picked a smaller, less busy checkpoint. Said the big ones were unpredictable. I asked about the cargo. Mark didn't give details. "You don't need to know what it is. You just need to know where it goes." That bothered me more than I admitted. But I kept going anyway. Because once you decide you're in, you start protecting that decision. You start avoiding thoughts that might undo it. I went home and barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashing lights. Every time I opened them, I told myself I was being dramatic. I packed a small overnight bag, kissed my girlfriend goodbye like it was a normal weekend, and didn't tell her a single true thing about where I was going. Lying started feeling natural. The morning of the trip, Mark texted me an address and a time. No emojis. No small talk. Just coordinates. It was an industrial area on the edge of town, the kind with cracked asphalt, chain-link fences, and buildings that all look abandoned even when they aren't. I parked next to a warehouse with faded numbers and a flickering security light. Two guys I'd never seen before were waiting. They didn't introduce themselves. One of them nodded toward my trunk and said, "Pop it." Inside were several sealed cardboard boxes, completely unmarked. No logos. No shipping labels. Nothing. They looked boring, which I realized was probably intentional. They worked fast, lifting the spare tire out, removing panels I didn't even know existed, unscrewing parts of the trunk lining with practiced hands. Watching my car being dismantled by strangers made my stomach twist. They slid flat, heavy packages into hidden compartments, taped everything back together, and put the boxes on top as camouflage. One of them pressed down on the trunk lid, testing the weight. "Feels right," he said. I asked, "What if they use a scanner?" The guy shrugged. "They usually don't." "Usually." Mark pulled me aside and handed me a burner phone. "If anything feels wrong, call this number. Otherwise, don't use it." He paused, then added, "And don't speed." I nodded like I was calm. I wasn't. When I got back into my driver's seat, it no longer felt like my car. It felt like a trap with wheels. The drive to the border took about 4 hours. Every mile stretched like rubber. At first, I blasted music to distract myself. That lasted maybe 10 minutes. The noise felt wrong, too loud, too noticeable. I turned it off and drove in silence. That's when the thoughts got loud. Every passing police car felt personal. Every semi-truck that lingered near me felt suspicious. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I was already being followed. I tried to look normal. Hands at 10 and 2. Speed exactly at the limit. Blinkers for every lane change. I became the most law-abiding driver on the highway. My mouth was dry the entire time. I chewed gum until my jaw hurt. My leg bounced uncontrollably, so I wedged my knee against the door to keep it still. About 30 minutes from the border, I stopped at a gas station. Mark had insisted I do this. "People who stop look like they're on real trips," he'd said. Inside, I bought a coffee and a pack of gum I didn't need. The cashier asked how my day was going. "Good," I said. It sounded fake even to me. Back in the car, I stared at the steering wheel for a full minute before starting the engine again. I remember thinking, I can still turn around. I didn't. When I finally saw the signs for the border crossing, my heart started hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Every border guard suddenly seemed overly attentive. Like they already knew. The line to the checkpoint wasn't long, which somehow made it worse. Fewer cars meant fewer distractions. No place to hide. I rolled my window down halfway like I'd seen people do 1,000 times. Tried to control my breathing. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. It barely helped. The car in front of me got waved through in under 30 seconds. 30 seconds. I kept repeating that number in my head, like it was a promise. When it was my turn, the guard stepped up to my window. Middle-aged guy. Neutral face. Sunglasses. Impossible to read. "Purpose of your trip?" "Visiting my aunt," I said. My voice cracked on. "Aunt." He looked at me for a second longer than felt normal. "Where does she live?" I gave the city Mark had drilled into me. "What does she do?" "She's a dental hygienist." He nodded slowly. like he was filing each word into a mental cabinet. Anything to declare? No. He leaned slightly forward and looked into my back seat, then my trunk area through the rear window. I felt sweat running down my spine. Pop the trunk. My brain went completely blank. I reached for the latch. And for a split second, I was sure my life was over. The trunk opened with a soft mechanical click that sounded deafening in my ears. I stepped out of the car because I wasn't sure what else to do with my body. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The guard walked to the back, peered inside, and stared at the boxes. "What's this?" he asked. "Gifts," I said. "For who?" "For my aunt." I had not rehearsed gifts. He picked up one of the boxes. Not roughly. Not gently either. Just neutrally. Like he was weighing possibilities, not cardboard. "How long you staying?" 3 days. "Anyone traveling with you?" "No." He set the box down. Then he did something that made my stomach drop into my shoes. He leaned down and looked under the trunk liner. I swear time slowed. I imagined hidden panels shifting, tape peeling, everything unraveling. Instead, he straightened up and closed the trunk. "Pull over to secondary inspection." Those 4 words felt heavier than the car itself. I got back in, barely able to feel the steering wheel. Secondary inspection was a small parking area with 2 other cars already there. I parked where he pointed. And waited. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I kept thinking, this is it. This is where it ends. Waiting is worse than action. When you're moving, at least you feel like you're doing something. Sitting in that car, engine off, hands in my lap, I had nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. Every possible future played on a loop. Handcuffs. Phone call to my girlfriend. My parents finding out from a stranger. I watched 2 officers talk near a small office building. One of them pointed in my direction. They both glanced at my car. I stared straight ahead like I was studying an invisible point on the windshield. My mouth tasted like metal. A different guard approached my driver's side window. Younger than the first one. No sunglasses. Clear eyes. Which somehow made it worse. "Step out of the vehicle, please," I complied. "Any weapons? Drugs? Large amounts of cash?" "No," I said. "Mind if we take a look inside your car?" I wanted to say no. I said, "Go ahead." He opened my doors. Checked under seats. Opened my overnight bag. Flipped through my clothes. Everything I'd packed looked painfully normal. Normal socks. Normal t-shirts. Normal life. Another guard walked around the car slowly, tapping panels with his knuckles like he was listening for hollow sounds. Every tap felt like a countdown. I stood there pretending to be calm. Inside, I was already saying goodbye to my freedom. The tapping stopped. One of the guards whispered something to the other. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the nod. That nod almost made me collapse. The younger guard looked at me again. Not aggressively. Not kindly. Just assessing. "Where'd you say you were headed?" I repeated the city. "Address?" I hesitated half a second too long. Then I gave the one Mark had drilled into me. He typed it into a small handheld device. Silence. The wind pushed dust across the pavement. Somewhere nearby, a car engine started and then faded away. He looked up. "Who lives there?" "My aunt. Linda." "What's her last name?" I hadn't practiced that part enough. I said the first common last name that came to mind. He raised an eyebrow. "What's her phone number?" My brain screamed. I don't have it memorized." That was technically true. He stared at me for a long moment. I could feel sweat gathering at my temples, sliding down my face. Finally, he handed my ID back. "Wait here." And walked away. Which somehow felt worse than being arrested. Because now I was stuck in possibility. Hope. And terror. I stood there alone, staring at my own car like it belonged to someone else. The longer they took, the more convinced I became that they were quietly dismantling the hidden compartments somewhere out of sight. I imagined tools, flashlights, a guard calling another over and saying, "Hey, look at this." My knees started to shake. I tried to slow my breathing again, but it kept turning into shallow little gasps. I folded my arms across my chest so they wouldn't see my hands trembling. The first guard, the one from the initial checkpoint, came back. He held a clipboard. "You nervous?" he asked casually. "Yes," I said. He smirked. "Why's that?" "Borders make me anxious." He studied my face, like he was trying to peel me open. "Ever been in trouble with the law before?" "No." Another pause. "You sure about that?" "Yes." Every lie felt heavier than the last. He glanced toward the secondary inspection building, then back at me. "Sit tight," and walked away again. At this point, I was past panic. I was numb. Like my body had decided to shut off feeling as a form of mercy. I remember thinking, if they arrest me, at least the waiting will stop. That thought scared me almost as much as getting caught. After what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes, the younger guard returned. He was holding my overnight bag. "We're going to run a quick scan on your vehicle," he said. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice anymore. They told me to stand near a concrete barrier while another officer drove my car a short distance away. Watching someone else drive my car felt deeply wrong, like watching a stranger walk off with my future. I stared at the empty space where my car had been. This was it. There was no way hidden compartments would survive a scan. I started mentally preparing speeches. Explanations. Please. Then I realized how ridiculous that was. There is no good explanation for what I was doing. I thought about my girlfriend finding out. About the look she'd give me. Not anger. Disappointment. That hurt worse. A few minutes later, the car came back. They parked it. No one was rushing. No one was shouting. Which somehow confused me. The younger guard handed me my bag. "Pop your trunk." My hands felt wooden as I pulled the latch again. He glanced inside, same as before. Then closed it. "You're free to go." I blinked. "What?" "Have a safe trip." I didn't say thank you. I just got in the car. And drove. I didn't feel relieved right away. That's the part that surprises people when I tell this story. I expected a rush. A victory high. Some movie-style moment where I'd laugh hysterically and feel invincible. Instead, I felt hollow. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. My shoulders were so tight they ached. I kept waiting for sirens. For someone to yell for me to pull over. For reality to correct itself. I drove 10 minutes before I realized I'd been holding my breath in short bursts. I forced myself to pull over at a rest stop. Sat there with the engine idling. Stared at nothing. That's when it hit me. I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Not the border. The personal one. Before this, I could still pretend I was. Basically a good person who just made dumb choices. Now I was someone who knowingly committed a serious crime and got away with it. That knowledge sat in my chest like a heavy object. I texted Mark. "Through." He replied almost instantly. "Told you." No congratulations. No celebration. Just confirmation. Which made it feel even more transactional. Like I was just another disposable part in a machine. I finished the drive to my Ant City. On autopilot, barely remembering the road. When I checked into a cheap motel that night, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and stared at my hands. They didn't look different. But I felt like they were. The next morning, I got a message with another address. No greeting. No context. Just a location and a time window. It was an old storage facility on the outskirts of a small town. Rows of dented metal doors, weeds pushing through cracked pavement, A flickering office sign that probably hadn't been fixed in years. I arrived early and parked near the back, where fewer people passed by. Sitting there, I started thinking about how absurd everything was. 12 hours earlier, I'd been terrified of prison. Now I was worried about being late. 2 men showed up in a white van. Not the same guys from the warehouse. They didn't ask my name. They didn't introduce themselves. One of them gestured toward my trunk. "Open it." I did. They worked fast, just like before. Panels off. Packages out. No small talk. Watching the hidden compartments get emptied felt strangely intimate, like someone pulling secrets out of my body. One of them handed me an envelope. Thick. Cash. I didn't count it. I didn't want to know how much my fear was worth in exact numbers. They finished, closed my trunk, and drove away. That was it. No handshake. No "good job." No acknowledgement that we just participated in something illegal together. I stood there alone in the lot, holding an envelope full of money, feeling absolutely nothing. Not happy. Not proud. Not even relieved. Just empty. Which scared me more than panic ever had. The drive back home felt longer than the drive to the border. Nothing was chasing me. No hidden cargo. No lies to tell guards. And yet, I was more uneasy than before. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like a quiet accusation. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a tightening in my chest. I kept thinking, this is blood money, even though, logically, I didn't know who was hurt by this specific shipment. But I knew, on some level, that harm doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like systems quietly rotting. I stopped at a grocery store halfway home. I don't know why. Habit, maybe? Or a desire to do something painfully normal. I walked the aisles pushing a cart, surrounded by people arguing about cereal brands and comparing prices on chicken. Nobody knew what I'd done. Nobody suspected a thing. That realization made me feel isolated in a way I'd never experienced before. I paid for my groceries in cash from my wallet, not from the envelope. It felt important to keep them separate. When I finally got home, my girlfriend hugged me and asked how my trip was. "Fine," I said. The word tasted sour. That night, I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. I realized I had just created a version of myself she didn't know existed. And I didn't know how to live with that version yet. I spent the next few weeks waiting for consequences that never came. No knock on the door. No strange phone calls. No unmarked cars idling outside my apartment. Life just continued. Which felt wrong. I paid off a chunk of my credit card debt with the cash. Bought groceries without checking my bank balance first. Fixed my car's brakes. Normal, responsible things. That almost made it worse. Because it was easy. Too easy. Mark texted me a month later. "Another run if you want." Same deal. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me remembered the terror at the border, the shaking hands, the hollow feeling afterward. Another part remembered how cleanly it had all worked. How nothing bad had happened. That's the dangerous part nobody warns you about. Not the first crime. The second one. Because the first one teaches you that you can survive it. I typed out a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. I realized I was standing at a fork in the road. Not between legal and illegal. Between becoming this person permanently, or treating that night as a line I never crossed again. I replied, "No. I'm out." Mark never responded. We stopped talking after that. And honestly, I think that saved me. I don't tell this story because I think I'm interesting. I tell it because I know how seductive small crimes can feel. Nobody puts a gun in your hand and says, "Become a criminal." They offer you a shortcut. A favor. An easy win. They wrap it in casual language so it doesn't sound like what it really is. Looking back, The scariest part wasn't the border guards or the hidden compartments, or the possibility of prison. It was how quickly I justified everything. How easily I reshaped my own morals to fit my needs. I still think about that younger guard sometimes. About how close he probably came to digging deeper. About how a different mood, a different policy, or a different 10 seconds could have completely changed my life. I got lucky. Luck is not a strategy. If you're reading this and you're in a tight spot, and someone is offering you fast money for low-risk work, please hear me. Low risk doesn't mean no risk. And just this once is a lie you tell yourself so you can live with the decision. I didn't get caught. But I didn't get away clean either. I live with the memory. I live with the knowledge of who I was willing to become. My advice? If your gut says something is wrong, listen. Walk away. Choose boring. Boring is underrated. And freedom is priceless.